Welcome. This is Serious About Law, which is a periodic podcast hosted by me, Merritt McAlister. I'm the Dean at the University of Florida Levin College of Law. These are going to be conversations that are serious about the law, legal education, and legal practice. But just like those of us at UF Law, we're not going to take ourselves too seriously in having those conversations. So this podcast is going to highlight what's happening at the law school and in legal education with an eye towards supporting and sharing information to the Gator Law Nation for future, current, and honorary Gator lawyers out there anywhere in the world. As we were thinking about where to start in this conversation, naturally I thought of a preeminent non-Gator lawyer who happens to share a wall with me. You've probably wondered, who the heck is this guy, Joseph Albert Mandernach, who is designated as Chief of Staff, which is a weird title. Some think that means he's the boss, but Dean Mandernach knows better. Think of him as the ambassador to people. As he once told me, he's mostly charm, light on substance, but very effective with other people. He's going to kill me at the end of this conversation, but like many things, he is a guinea pig for my crazy ideas. And so we thought starting with him would be a good thing to get to know Dean Mandernach. Welcome, Dean Mandernach.
I'm not even knowing where to go with that right now, Dean McAlister, but thank you very much for that august introduction.
You're welcome, Dean Mandernach. Many people probably would not expect this about you, but you actually attended law school.
This is all true, and I would like to point out that having just reviewed the rankings, both current and former, I attended a very distinguished law school. Some would be even more surprised to learn that. I am a very proud graduate of the University of Minnesota Law School.
Go Badgers.
No! Go Gophers!
Oh, crap!
Oh, Dean.
Oh, wow. That's really bad.
That's
okay.
terrible.
Well, Go Gators. Oh, Gophers. I'm sorry. Badgers is Wisconsin. That's
Gophers,
probably actually a rivalry, isn't it?
It's a big rivalry.
Okay.
It's our biggest.
Oops, I totally stepped in that. Okay.
Gophers are the fiercest of the small rodents, I'll have you know.
Very fierce small rodents.
That's right.
Go Gophers.
Yeah, we'll workshop it.
Okay, we're going to workshop that. So, Dean Mandernach, if I can call you Joe, is that okay?
You're the boss, yeah, of course.
Well, no, you're the chief of staff. I mean, looking back on your career, since you did go to law school after all, what do you think was the moment or experience? I'll skip over the idea that shaped you as a lawyer, because I don't think you identify as a lawyer on a daily basis, do you?
Not in any way, shape, or form.
Not in any way, shape, or form?
Well, that's not true. I will not say that, because what I am most grateful for legal education, and I said this the first day of ITL, Joanna can confirm, I think law school is one of the best educations anybody can get. It is 3 years of intensive public speaking, writing, and research. I don't care if you want to be a ditch digger. That is a phenomenal education. And so whenever anybody asks, do you regret not using your law degree or whatever, I always correct them to say I use it every day. And it's something that has continued to pay dividends even though I didn't stay on a partner track.
But you did practice law for a little bit, right?
I did, yeah. 3 years in Minneapolis.
3 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe if you don't identify presently as a lawyer, even though those skills clearly inform how you approach your work, looking back on the career, what moment or experience do you think most shaped you as a leader? You've obviously been a leader in a variety of different roles here at the University of Florida, including your current role. Is there a moment or experience that you can highlight?
Yes, I say this counterintuitively, and I think every professional should go through an experience where you get your ass kicked. And there is an experience that comes with that on the one hand is humbling, to say the least. But through that humbling process, you sort of find yourself and you develop your skills and you emerge with a stronger self-awareness of Maybe I'm not this, but I might be this. And it's this kind of emergence, so to speak, of a profession. And I think that is the one thing I will be very, again, grateful for a legal experience at the firm I was at. It was intense stuff, but it remains formative, and I continue to think about it with regularity. Like that, if you don't have that experience, I think it skews your worldview going into whatever job you're going to do. I don't think you have sufficient perspective. I think it's a very important aspect that anybody should do. It doesn't have to be a law firm, of course. It can anything, but just something where you are in the deep end of the pool and you are having people tell you with regularity, you really got to get better here, you got to get better here in ways that may or may not be nice. You got to go through that to kind of get a tougher spine and come out of the back end of it. Is there any particular experience that stands out that you're willing to share? I know. I'm trying to think right now. When I was at Robbins, it was an intense environment. It had a reputation and that kind of thing. Amazing lawyers, national lawyer. We could spend the rest of the hour talking about all the cool stuff that lawyers did. But at the same time, I did a memo that was candidly totally misread the question presented. And I heard about it appropriately, but that was a moment where it was like, yep, you really screwed that one up pretty good. There was no way around it. And as somebody was still a little bit of that law school sheen, I'm going to be a lawyer, this is great. You get a pretty good perspective pretty quick that this ain't all happy hours and, paychecks and things like that. There is some high expectations that you are not accustomed to that come with that. I think it's important that all students, incoming, current, understand that all of us who maybe seem as if we've succeeded have had real moments Correct. Where we've been sort of put in our place or Absolutely. Knocked down. So Absolutely. Thank you for being willing to share that with the person who currently employs you. What would you say, as you acknowledge, right, you practiced law for a few years, you were in a law school, it was a few years ago that you received your legal education. You have now parachuted back into a law school after spending, and we can talk about sort of what you did in between those times, but you've been in higher ed and largely in a fundraising role for many years. So you're back now in a law school environment. You've been in a law school environment for the last sort of year and a half, spending more time with the legal world. What kind of changes have you seen in those several decades in between those experiences that strike you? Yeah, the thing that stands out, and we've talked about this, the student support aspect and the student financial aid aspect. Those two things did not exist for all intents and purposes in 1999 at the University of Minnesota. In what way? You didn't get financial support? Yeah, there was no Dean Lopez and her team? The top of the top would get a scholarship, but after that, it was unheard of to get a scholarship unless somebody was military. And then absolutely, bar prep was taking out yet another loan to get a Barbary course and then crashing in that. On graduation, we didn't see anybody from the U again. You all showed up at this massive arena in late July. You were kind of on your own. You brought everything around academic success and bar prep, totally and completely different. Totally different. For those who don't know, the U is the University of Minnesota. That's what Gophers call it. That's right. Do you use AI, artificial intelligence, in any kind of ongoing way in your daily life? To the extent ChatGPT is relevant to that, a little bit. But so you're using ChatGPT to do all your communications, right? Yeah, I am the least substantive person here. You know that. Yeah. He's kidding. I think. What is your perspective on how you've seen that, whether at the university level, in law firms? How is that changing the way folks do business? And if you don't have a perspective on this, we'll skip this question. I don't have as much of a perspective as some would, but that's the other piece of having sat in faculty meetings and things like that, listening to students. I think there is, to evaluate authentically somebody's writing and things like that. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but just that process of evaluation, that is another area where it looks dramatically different. Plagiarism in the late 1990s would be finding a copy of somebody else's paper and then writing it, not plugging it in. So, from a lawyering perspective, law student perspective, law faculty perspective, I don't want to remove them from the conversation. I think AI is a profound change. And I know that's almost cliched to say right now with regard to any industry, but.
So let's shift and talk about what you currently do. I made a joke at the outset that no one actually knows what you do. They think a chief of staff either runs the law school or whatnot, and there's some truth to that. Tell me first, how would you describe your current job, your role? What value you add to the law school?
Yeah, well, let's be honest.
Those might be different answers.
Open for debate, depending upon who you ask. But most organically, I get to work with Whitney and our marketing communications team, our admissions team, our fundraising teams. Love that aspect of kind of the relationship building and messaging and things like that. Work with you pretty closely on kind of the executive messaging. I enjoy a lot doing whatever I can to position the College of Law with key relationships, either on campus or in Tallahassee and politically and otherwise. I am hopeful that those that would work with me, maybe closely, would see some value in terms of bringing a big picture or at least enhancing a big picture perspective at the law school. I think it's very easy. I love lawyers, obviously. I have them in my family in addition to my coworkers. They're very good at being policy focused and in the weeds and that kind of thing. I think one area that is a special skill that lawyers could develop further is a little bit of big picture perspective and seeing how the pieces fit together. So, and I think that's probably especially true with where UF Law is in its sort of institutional history. There have been changes galore over the last 3 years that have been well documented, not just here, but at the university level and at the state level. I think those are pretty intense conversations that don't fit neatly into this is how we've done it before kind of stuff. So that's a mix. And then as things come up and as needed, as necessary, people describe these kinds of roles as making sure things get done, not necessarily, doing them, but just connecting dots and making sure things get done. I'd like all our listeners to reflect. I answered that entire question without making a snarky comment about D. McAlister or anybody else. So I'd like that noted in my favor once we're done with this, Nick, all right?
Yes, you are the ambassador of snark here.
I am very witty, for those who don't know me very well.
So he thinks. So what would you say, other than dealing with the snark of your coworkers or the lack of sufficient deference and respect of your many charming and significant contributions, what would you say is the most challenging part of your role today, and how do you navigate that, other than, managing me and the crazy ideas I want to do, like a podcast?
The most challenging piece. Well, I will say that would have been an easier question to answer in a prior life. I think the most challenging piece right now is you have to take your personal perspective out of it to some degree and put the needs of the institution, the dean, things like that first. And that is not always an easy thing to do. And it does require a pause moment and reviewing, let's say, whatever suggestions I'm giving or that kind of thing to make sure it's not going through an internal self-righteous filter, for instance, or more of a, this is where we live, this is what we're going to do, this is what's going to be best for the law school, and approach it that way. That requires some pause. And candidly, I think we could say it's a hard thing to do that not everyone does very well. I may not do it very well myself. I should ask that of you, but that's a hard thing to do. No, I don't know that it's the most hard. I'd have to think more about it, but that is something that sometimes still requires some thought. I
wonder if this answer is different if you had practiced law longer. I find that the role is in some ways representative. So if you're serving a client, right? So I see it as my client is the University of Florida Levin College of Law. And it doesn't mean I always agree with my client, but my client has a unique set of problems that are not necessarily mine. And so my job is to advance the client's interest, even if it may not be what I would personally do if I were setting up a law school in a first instance or whatever, right? But I don't know. It's a representational job where your job is to be a zealous advocate for your client.
Yeah, I wonder mightily if my answer would have been shaped had I practiced law for a decade.
I mean, you did. You practiced law for some amount of time, which is one of the reasons why I hired you, because I thought you could at least, speak the language.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, in a prior life, it was more about managing relationships and things like that. And so there was a bit of a tweak on it, but you're exactly right, that removing yourself from, the
Talk some about that prior work. I think folks think that fundraising, because you were a mega fundraiser, you raised a lot of money for UF in different ways. A lot of people find fundraising sort of uncomfortable because they think it's asking a lot of people for money, and that feels icky to them, right? I think there are deans that are like, oh, I love all sorts of things, but I don't want to have to go ask people for money. And you got to ask people for money, right? But fundraisers are the professionals who help set up universities for success in this regard and help them achieve their vision. So talk a little bit about what that role was and what you enjoyed in doing it.
Yeah, so I'll answer the last part first. There's no better way to get to understand a university than sitting in a fundraising space. You sit smack between university leadership, external clients. It's a great way to learn about not just where the university is going, how finances fit. You get a pretty good sense of how things are funded. So it's just been a fantastic opportunity to learn about the University of Florida. But then on top of that, I was beyond fortunate in that I started in IFAS. I went to the Central Foundation. I then was at UF Health. So in terms of understanding just these huge integral pieces to the university, I have had a chance to see a lot of those different places at a pretty grassroots level and work with senior leaders in each of those areas, which again, especially when I first started, I remember thinking, I am not the one that should be sitting in this room with the senior vice president for agriculture. This was fantastic. How am I sitting here? So that was very, very cool stuff. What fundraising is in the best sense, though, is you're working with people who are philanthropically inclined to start off with. It's not as if you have hat in hand. There is very much a conversation or kind of a beginning step where you want to introduce your institution. It is not different than how you describe the role as almost a little bit of an attorney-like. They're your client. You're bringing ideas to the table on their behalf. But if you're doing it the right way, it is aligning institutional needs with what the prospect has an existing passion for. It's candidly, I think, and I've shared this with others, much easier in some ways at a place like the University of Florida as opposed to a smaller, more local nonprofit. I've always said, in my mind, at least for my skill set, those would be very, very difficult. There are more people who graduated from UF, who have a passion for UF, who want to be involved with UF. There's a ready-made base of people to talk to that want to be involved and be supportive. It was a great experience on a lot of different levels.
How did you go from law to fundraising?
Going back to how I remember there was kind of one in particular light bulb moment where I was at the firm. I was like, I'm not sure this is going to be my long term. And I started in a place where I love universities and I've always loved universities. And all I did was I started doing informational interviews. We were fortunate in the Twin Cities to have a number of universities there. And I just started doing informational interviews with random people I found at those universities, and they were all very nice to indulge, somebody who didn't know what they were talking about. But I'll never forget this. I met the person who was kind of a fundraiser for my alma mater, and not any more scientific than this. It was like, well, that doesn't sound like too bad of a job. I could do that. And nothing more complicated than that. And then since I was making this pretty drastic professional move, I was like, well, I'm going to live in a different part of the country. And I applied to a bunch of schools in the Northeast and the Pacific Northwest. And I got a random call from a small little liberal arts school in Salem, Oregon, and started out there. Why they hired me, I have absolutely no idea, but I was very, very lucky.
That was Willamette, right?
Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. Gorgeous little spot.
Which another one of our favorite colleagues started his career at Willamette.
I passed my test with him when I knew how to pronounce it. Willamette University.
This is Dean Peter Molk. So I'm curious, stepping into sort of, owning your leadership role, your counseling role, advice role. We've had, over the last year, there have been a variety of difficult things that have happened in the law school, and you've provided counsel and sage guidance. How do you approach those kinds of questions. You talked to some about sort of the need to set aside your own gut instinct, if you will, or sort of your personal values might be in approaching a situation. Although, I think good leaders are also still authentically themselves. How do you navigate sort of one of those difficult judgment calls? How do you approach that? What kind of process? How do you provide guidance?
Well, I'll answer this with one of the aspirations I've heard you describe quite articulately about UF Law. And I think fundamentally what attracted me in the first place to being here, we have a chance to do it differently. And so it would be impossible to approach one of these hard conversations or hard situations without being mindful of broader context. And I don't want to get to whatever, societal, that kind of thing. And so a piece of whatever conversations we've had about this, I think, relates to, we're going to do it the right way and set a model and be an example. That doesn't lead immediately to a right, quote unquote, decision, but I hope there's a process and something that we can use as a little bit of an example as to how we are going to approach these things with that aspiration in mind. I have no doubt, mistakes have been made, would have done things differently, absolutely. But keeping that out there, that institutionally, when we're confronted with these things, which law schools naturally are and candidly probably should be, we're going to do it the right way. And we're going to do it in a way that, certainly maintains our academic mission, maintains the safety of our campus community. It's not some self-righteous kind of approach. I hope that's not how it's coming across. But it's going to be doing things the right way and mindful of a number of stakeholders, but just keeping some sort of aspiration in mind, I think, is a starting point for those conversations.
You've been teaching this year. You have an opportunity to teach.
Those at home couldn't see that, but she put teaching in air quotes.
Yes. Maybe not drawing from your vast legal experience, but from a lot of insight, I think, into relationships and people and leadership opportunities and navigating that. What do you see as essential skills for the lawyers and leaders who are in law school now and are thinking about what kind of impact they want to make on the world?
It's a timely question as we got round 2 of ITL beginning tomorrow morning. It's also arguably the most overused term when it comes to coaching or anything else, but however defined, and we can talk about our own personal definition, it's that emotional intelligence quotient.
How do you teach that, though,
Well,
Joe?
right. That's exactly, and I've thought a lot about it, and it's what the next conversation is going to be. In my mind, since it's almost become background noise, everybody talks about it, nobody really knows it, everybody thinks they have it, which is harder. In my mind, it goes back a little bit to what I said, one of those formative professional experiences. You have to get your ass kicked. You have to have a moment that either forces you or you get there on your own, although it's better if you're forced, where you have to take stock of what you're good at and your blind spots. And in my mind, a starting point, I think, for developing emotional intelligence is working on kind of that list, or at least beginning to come up with a process where you attack your weaknesses and don't necessarily revel in your strengths. And that, to me, as you begin to better understand that, then that allows you to, all right, approach situations or recognize maybe what's going on with your own worldview, so to speak, of a conversation and work backwards from there. Because you're right, it's like all those books, whether they're good to great, going back a few years or any of those, I promise 90% of the people read those and like, oh, I do this already. They wrote this book about me. I got news for everybody. They didn't, and you're not real good at what you think you might be good at. It's just being comfortable and secure enough in yourself to attack that stuff. I think that's really hard.
I will, to even pick it myself, I think I started reading one of the books that you had suggested to someone, which had identified a number of basically not quite fatal sins, but less desirable traits among leaders. And I very virtuously came in and said, I thought I had none of them, right? And then I think you and Susie Heinbachel, who works with me,
you
said,
were the one person.
Yeah, you're probably not the one person who has none of those faults. I mean, not to say I don't have faults. I have faults. I just didn't think they were among the
14 listed.
The listed. There are many. How do you? Other than, for me at least, I have a spouse who reminds me frequently of my faults.
Spouses are very good at that. Yeah, that's
okay.
Right.
How do you make that inventory of weaknesses? Because I will say I've asked you for feedback, and you're very reluctant to give it up.
No, it is. Feedback is hard, and so you have to go through at least the process. I mean that. There is a process. You have to be open to it. All that stuff I think is true. I've done all the usual stuff in terms of a 360, confidential feedback and all that kind of thing. So that's, I think that is helpful. It's difficult though, especially in a role like yours, to get candid feedback. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the challenge of anybody in a senior kind of role, getting authentic feedback. I think it's a process. I'm going to weasel out of the answer a little bit, just almost being aware of it and continuing to look at yourself. When things don't go well, there's an instinct to, this person or that person. I promise when something doesn't go well, there's a non-negligible piece of the problem that you can probably own yourself.
Yeah.
As hard as that is, let's take a look at that and what should you have done differently, knowing you can't control anybody else. So there are things like that, but I'm struggling, at least in the moment, to come up with like a hard and fast answer on that.
I was at an event last week where a very distinguished leader emphasized that her approach to some of these issues was basically to lean into strengths and to some extent ignore weaknesses. Not ignore, but to position oneself to maybe outsource the weaknesses, right? Find somebody else who can manage the weaknesses and lean into the strengths and only do and focus on the things that are areas of strength. I don't know if that's possible because I think, our weaknesses are almost unavoidable, right? They're there, they influence us. But I don't know. Where would you...
But even in that scenario, I do like what they said about, that requires an awareness of your weaknesses. And that's a good first step.
Right.
And so I think there's something
true.
very much to that.
Yeah.
Because you've heard me say, and I think anybody who's worked with me at UF, everybody knows I need people who have type A, attention to detail, in the weeds, around me at all times.
Because he is not...
I think 90% of details are just totally worthless, and I have no interest in them.
And one of the challenges we have is I generally agree with him on that. And so I have to find people around me who are going to pay attention to this.
You're wondering why nothing comes out of the dean's office other than, this is a great idea.
This is why on occasion I should not be writing my own emails, right? Because I don't always pay attention to as much detail.
But
so you have to compensate, right?
That's
so you have to know, which is not to say that details aren't really important.
No,
it's just that they don't come
facetious, but that's right.
That's naturally, right?
That's
You're right. And there are people, and we've worked with them, right, who really love and excel and love the details. And so you find a team that balances it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can you think about, as you're thinking about sort of advice for the future, drawing on, obviously you've done some teaching, you are, I think, a consummate relationship guy. We could spend a whole conversation on emotional intelligence and how to develop that, and I think you're really exceptional at that, and you do help others. What kind of advice, as you're thinking about the future of the legal profession, your students today, what would you want them to work on in law school or to achieve or to sort of put on their inventory of things that will help them succeed going forward?
I would stress relationships. I mean, that's a self-serving answer.
What does that mean, relationships?
Right. It's building authentic relationships with colleagues, not people talk about networking and it immediately conjures up probably a little bit of a smarmy image. That's not what it is. Think about our volunteer board right now for the school. Those relationships have existed for 30 years. And we, at a recent meeting, heard our board chair get up and talk about her father passing, who happened to be a mentor to somebody else in the group because they connected in law school. I like how you start off when the 1Ls are there for orientation, looking around the room. You're going to be sitting next to people who will be in your wedding or that you will know for the next 50 years. I like that aspect of it. Grades are important. I get all that. I mean, essentially, we're a professional program, so of course. But that aspect and continuing to find ways to develop that during law school is critical. I mean, just critical. It broadens your perspective. It introduces you to new ideas. You can ideally find somebody that's not from your background, that hopefully doesn't share your interests, but that doesn't have horns and a tail, that you can begin to understand things a little bit differently. That aspect is something, I don't know how you teach it, but coming out of law school with more of that, I think, is just massively important for whatever you want to do for the rest of your life.
What advice do you give for folks who are anxious about creating relationships, right? Who don't have maybe the natural skills that you have to sort of be interested in other people and ask questions? How do you work on that?
Well, at the risk of exposing some snark, I'd say get over it to a degree. Like, you are going to be in an environment where that's important. And I don't want to frame it as a negative, but making some effort that way, going back to the analogy you shared before, you have to lean into it. And that leaning into it might look differently for different people. If it's not your natural skill set, I totally understand. My wife is not wired this way naturally at all. But understanding and maybe embracing, if that's not too strong of a word, the recognition that this is going to be a key part of your success going forward. It is unrealistic, I think, to assume that you can hide out and rely on technical skill alone going forward. And I think that advice cuts across whatever profession is out there. You hear it with regard to engineers. I love this with the prior dean of engineering. What was their biggest challenge? It wasn't teaching them engineering. It was teaching them writing and relationship skills. And they endowed a leadership institute to try to capture this. So there's that thread, I feel like, that cuts across any industry. And so whether you like it or don't like it, you have to find a way to embrace it in a way that makes sense to you, but you cannot run from it. You have to embrace it.
One final question. As we think about the future of law school, University of Florida, what gives you optimism about that future, whether for our students or for our institution?
Sass was onto something. He didn't say it quite right this way, but the University of Florida is the most important institution of higher education in the most important state in the country right now. And that is invigorating to feel a part of that environment within the UF ecosystem. UF Law has an outsized presence, I think. On the one hand, very autonomous, but still within the UF umbrella. That's pretty exciting to be a part of that, regardless of the hard conversations that come with that. And so it's hard not to feel a little bit optimistic that, you know, it's like what I said before, come hell or high water, we're going to do this the right way. We are resourced. You know, I hate to boil it down to that, but we have resources that make us the envy, I think, of a lot of other higher ed institutions in the country. You put all that together, and whatever the current drama of the day is, looking ahead, I got to believe we are going to be in very, very good shape going forward.
It's a good note to end on, Dean Mandernach. I thank you for being my inaugural guest. I do think you embody the spirit of this podcast, both taking what we do seriously, but not yourself.
Thank you.
So thank you.